Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked into the great chamber of the Galactic Council with her head held high and her heart burning with 300 years of accumulated insults. The chamber was massive and built to intimidate smaller species, with seats rising in endless tiers toward a ceiling that glowed with artificial starlight. And representatives from over 200 species watched her approach the central platform where humans were required to stand. Because they had never been given proper seats. She had been doing this job for 15 years, and her predecessor had done it for 20 years before her, and every single human ambassador going back to first contact had stood in this exact spot and asked for the same thing, respect. And every single time the answer had been the same. Not yet. The Velthari High Speaker rose from his elevated throne at the top of the chamber, and his 4 eyes looked down at Elena with the kind of expression one might give to a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. His name was Ethan, and he had been blocking humanity's advancement in the council for over 60 years because his species believed they were the natural leaders of all intelligent life, and the very idea of humans being their equals made his blue skin flush with disgust. The council recognizes the representative from Earth, he said in a voice that somehow made recognition sound like an insult. Elena stepped forward and activated her translator implant. High Speaker, I come before this council once again to formally request full membership status for the United Earth Federation. With all the rights and privileges that status provides. A ripple of amusement went through the chamber, and Elena heard the clicking laughter of the Cathari and the deep humming chuckles of the Aranax. They always laughed. Ambassador Vasquez, Ethan said with exaggerated patience, we have discussed this matter many times, and as I have explained to you and to your predecessors, humanity is a young species, barely 300 years removed from your first stumbling steps into space. 300 years during which we have contributed more to galactic welfare than any other species in that same time frame. Elena replied calmly. This was also part of the ritual, and she knew what came next. Contributions. Ethan said the word, like it tasted bad. Yes, your species does seem to enjoy being helpful, and we appreciate your medical assistance programs, and your engineering support, and your peacekeeping forces. But contribution is not the same as civilization. Then what exactly do we lack? Elena asked. Ethan leaned forward, and his 4 eyes narrowed with something that looked almost like pleasure. Cultural maturity. Ambassador, your species still carries the marks of your violent evolutionary heritage. You still have conflicts among yourselves. You still struggle with basic concepts of social harmony. And frankly, the Council believes that allowing a species with your aggressive tendencies full access to our technology and trade networks would be irresponsible. Elena felt her hands tighten into fists at her sides, but she kept her voice level. We have never once used violence against any Council species. Not yet. Ethan agreed with a thin smile. And we intend to keep it that way by maintaining appropriate oversight of your development. Another millennium or so of observation should be sufficient to determine if humanity can truly be trusted. A millennium. 1,000 more years of standing in this exact spot, and being told they were not good enough. Elena thought about the human doctors working double shifts on Velar Prime, because the Velthari medical system had collapsed under its own bureaucracy. She thought about the human engineers keeping the Cathari mining colonies alive because those proud warriors had never bothered to learn how to maintain their own life support systems. She thought about the human soldiers who had died protecting Oranax trade convoys from pirates because the Oranax had decided centuries ago that maintaining a military was beneath their dignity. 300 years of service and sacrifice, and what did humanity have to show for it? Restricted trade routes that cost them 5 times what other species paid. Technology embargoes that kept them dependent on Council goodwill. A seat at the table that was not really a seat at all, but a spot on the floor where they could watch their betters make decisions about their future. Elena looked up at Ethan, and something inside her shifted. She had come here today, prepared to make the same request she always made and receive the same rejection. She always received and go home to write the same report she always wrote. But standing there looking at the contempt in those 4 alien eyes, she realized something important. She was tired. Humanity was tired. And they did not have to do this anymore, High Speaker, she said, and her voice carried clearly through the suddenly quiet chamber. I thank you for your honesty, and I have a statement to make on behalf of the United Earth Federation. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. Speak then, we will add it to the record with all your other protests. Elena smiled, and it was not a nice smile. The United Earth Federation formally withdraws from all treaties and agreements with the Galactic Council. Effective immediately, the chamber went silent in a way that Elena had never experienced before, and for a long moment nobody moved or spoke or even seemed to breathe. I am sorry, Ethan said slowly. I do not think I understood you correctly. You understood perfectly. Elena replied, we are leaving. All of our medical personnel will be recalled from Council space within 30 standard days. All engineering support contracts are hereby terminated. All peacekeeping forces will return to Earth immediately. Our borders are closed to Council traffic and our trade. Relationships are dissolved. The chamber erupted into chaos with representatives shouting and gesturing and demanding explanations. But Elena simply stood in the middle of it all with her hands clasped behind her back and a feeling of peace settling over her heart. A Cathari representative pushed his way to the front of the crowd. You cannot do this. We have agreements. We have contracts. Contracts require mutual respect to function, Elena said. You have made it clear that you have none for us, so we see no reason to continue honoring our obligations. This is madness. An Ornax delegate sputtered. You need us far more than we need you. Elena turned to look at him with something that might have been pity. I suppose we will find out. She walked toward the exit, and the crowd parted before her almost unconsciously. And at the door she paused and looked back at the chaos she was leaving behind. You spent 300 years telling us we were not good enough, she said. Congratulations, you finally convinced us. And now you get to see what the galaxy looks like without us. I hope it is everything you dreamed it would be. The doors closed behind her and Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked away from the Galactic Council forever. Behind her, the screaming had only just begun. 3 months after the humans left, everything started to fall apart. High Speaker Ethan had assured the Council that this was nothing more than a tantrum and that the humans would come crawling back. Within weeks, once they realized how much they needed Council resources and technology, he'd been wrong. The first crisis hit Villar Prime, which was the Velthari homeworld and the jewel of their ancient civilization. For the past 200 years, human medical teams had been running the emergency response centers in every major city because the Velthari had decided long ago that manual labor of any kind was beneath their dignity and medicine required. Touching sick people, which was simply unacceptable for a species of their cultural refinement. The humans had never complained about this arrangement, because humans never complained about anything, and they had built a medical infrastructure that kept billions of Velthari alive and healthy now. That infrastructure had no one to run it. The first week after the humans departed, the Velthari tried to replace them with automated systems. But the humans had been doing so much more than anyone realized, and the machines could not handle the complexity. The second week, the hospitals began turning away patients because there was simply no one qualified to treat them. By the end of the first month, the death toll had reached into the millions, and Ethan found himself facing angry mobs in the streets, demanding to know why their children were dying of diseases that had been curable just months before. He told them it was the humans' fault for abandoning their posts. Mobs did not believe him. On the other side of the galaxy, the Cathari were facing their own disaster. The Cathari were a proud warrior species. who had conquered a dozen worlds in their early history, and they considered themselves the greatest fighters in the known universe. What they did not consider themselves was engineers. Their mining colonies on the outer rim had been built with human assistance and maintained by human technical teams for over a century, and the Cathari had always viewed this arrangement with contempt because real warriors did not concern themselves with pipes and wires and atmospheric processors. Now those pipes and wires and atmospheric processors were failing, and the Cathari had no idea how to fix them. Colony 7 was the first to go. Atmospheric processors failed at 3 in the morning local time, and by sunrise 12,000 Cathari were dead from oxygen deprivation. The warriors who had mocked human engineers as weak and soft died gasping for breath in their beds because they had never bothered to learn how to maintain the systems that kept them alive. Colony 12 went next, and then Colony 4, and by the end of the second month, the Cathari had lost nearly 100,000 citizens to what their leaders were calling technical malfunctions, but what everyone else was calling the price of arrogance. The Oranax suffered differently, but no less severely. For centuries, the Oranax had controlled the great trade routes that connected the galaxy, and their wealth was legendary among all species. They had achieved this dominance not through military might, but through careful diplomacy and strategic positioning and the quiet understanding that human peacekeeping forces would handle any pirates or raiders who threatened their convoys. The Oranax had not maintained their own military fleet for over 300 years, because why would they when the humans did it so much better and so much cheaper? Now the humans were gone, and the pirates knew it. The first convoy to be hit was carrying rare minerals worth enough to buy a small moon, and the Oranax sent urgent messages to their usual human security contacts, only to receive automated responses informing them that all contracts had been terminated. The second convoy carried food supplies for 17 colony worlds, and when the pirates took it, those worlds began to starve. By the end of the third month, the once mighty Oranax Trade Federation had lost 40% of its shipping capacity, and their economy was in freefall. Council held emergency session after emergency session, but every meeting devolved into blame and accusation. The Valthari blamed the Cathari for not maintaining their own colonies. Cathari blamed the Oranax for not protecting the trade routes. The Oranax blamed the Valthari for driving the humans away in the first place, and around it went while the galaxy burned. Ambassador Tevex of the Synthesis Collective watched all of this with growing horror. The Synthesis Collective was a small species, and they had always stayed quiet in council meetings because they lacked the power to influence the larger players. But Tevex was old, and he remembered things that the younger generations had forgotten. He remembered the first days after humanity made contact with the council, and how eager they had been to help, and how freely they had shared their knowledge and skills. Remembered watching human doctors work through the night to save Volthori children during the plague of 2847. He remembered human engineers teaching Cathari workers how to maintain their equipment, and human soldiers standing guard over Oranax convoys without ever asking for glory or recognition. The humans had been serving the galaxy for 300 years, and what had the galaxy given them in return? Contempt, dismissal, constant message that they were not good enough, and never would. Bethvex made a decision that would change his life forever. He requested permission to visit the human border, and to his surprise, it was granted. What he found there terrified him more than all the disasters combined. The human border was not fortified for war as he had expected. Instead, he found construction massive, stations being built with efficiency that made his head spin, and new colonies being established on worlds the council had deemed worthless, and trade ships moving in patterns that suggested an economy completely independent of council resources. The humans were not preparing to come back. They were not waiting for an apology or negotiating for better terms. They were simply moving on, building a future that did not include the council. At Alfavs requested a meeting with human authorities, and after 3 days of waiting, He was granted an audience with a minor diplomatic official. "We appreciate your visit, Ambassador," the human said politely, "but we are not interested in rejoining the council. I am not here to ask you to rejoin." Tavex replied carefully, "I am here to understand." The human studied him for a long moment. "Understand what exactly? Why you helped?" "Yes, for so long when we treated you so badly." The human smiled, and there was sadness in that expression that Tavex would remember for the rest of his life. "Because we hoped you would learn," she said. "We hoped that if we showed you enough kindness, you would eventually show kindness in return. We were wrong, but we do not regret trying." Tavex returned. Council space with a report that no one wanted to hear. The humans were not coming. Back the galaxy would have to save itself, and based on everything he had seen so far, the galaxy had no idea how. High Speaker Ethon stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council and announced his plan to save civilization. 6 months had passed since the humans departed, and in that time the galaxy had descended into chaos that no one had predicted. The death toll across all council species had reached into the hundreds of millions, and economies were collapsing, and social order was breaking down, and through it all the humans sat behind their closed borders, doing absolutely nothing. Ethon had spent those 6 months trying everything he could think of to bring the humans back. He had sent diplomatic missions that were politely turned away at the border. He had offered trade concessions that the humans rejected without even reading. He had even swallowed his pride and issued what he called an expression of regret, though he had been very careful not to actually apologize for anything specific. Nothing worked. The humans seemed perfectly content to watch the galaxy burn, and that made Ethon furious beyond words. If they would not respond to diplomacy, then perhaps they would respond to something else. "Fellow council members," he said in his most commanding voice, "we have been patient with humanity. We have offered them every opportunity to return to their proper place in galactic society, and they have rejected our generosity at every turn." The chamber was quiet, and every representative knew what was coming. "I propose that we remind humanity of their position in the universe," Ethon continued. "Not through violence, of course, but through a demonstration of unified strength. A fleet assembled from all council species, positioned at the human border to show them that they exist at our sufferance and not the other way around." The vote was closer than Ethon expected, but in the end, desperation won out over caution. 200 warships from 12 different species assembled at the edge of human space, and it was the largest military force the council had fielded in over 1,000 years. Ethon commanded the fleet from his personal flagship, and as he watched his armada take position, he felt a deep satisfaction. Let the humans see this and understand that they were small and alone against the combined might of galactic civilization. The humans would have no choice but to negotiate, and this time Ethon would make sure they understood their place. The response came within hours, but it was not what anyone expected. A single ship emerged from human space. It was old and small, and it broadcast no weapon signatures, and it approached the massive fleet with the casual confidence of someone out for a pleasant afternoon flight. The fleet's sensors identified it as a transport vessel at least 50 years past its recommended service life, and every tactical officer in the armada immediately dismissed it as irrelevant. But the ship kept coming, and then it stopped directly between the fleet and the human border, and a communication channel opened. "This is Admiral Chun Wei of the United Earth Federation," a calm voice said. "I am here to offer you a choice." Ethon laughed out loud on his bridge. A single admiral in a single ancient ship offering choices to 200 warships. The arrogance of these humans never failed to amaze him, Admiral Chun. Ethon replied with amusement in his voice. "I appreciate your courage, but surely you can see that you are somewhat outnumbered. Please stand aside and allow us to pass so we can have a civilized discussion with your government." "I am afraid I cannot do that, High Speaker," Chun said. and there was something in his voice that made several of Ethan's officers exchange nervous glances. "You see, this border is closed, and I have been ordered to keep it that way, with one ship." Ethan asked incredulously. "One ship should be sufficient." Chun replied, "But I want to give you the opportunity to turn around and go home, because if you do not, then I will be forced to show you something that humanity has kept hidden for a very long time, and I do not think you will enjoy the lesson." Ethan's amusement faded into irritation. "Admiral, I grow tired of this game. You have 1 minute to move your vessel, or we will move it for you." "Aye, Speaker," Chun said, and now his voice was hard as steel. "Humanity spent 300 years being helpful instead of being feared. We made that choice deliberately because we believed that kindness was more valuable than power. But make no mistake, we were never weak. We were patient. And now you are about to discover what we were being patient about." Ethan gave the order to advance. What happened next would be studied and debated and analyzed for the next 1,000 years. The first wave of council ships opened fire on Chun's vessel with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Every shot missed, not because Chun dodged them, but because every weapon system on every ship suddenly stopped working correctly and targeting. Computers went haywire and energy weapons discharged harmlessly into space before anyone could understand what was happening. Chun's little ship moved. It did not fly so much as it danced, and it wove through the massive fleet like water through stones, and everywhere it went ships died. Ethan watched in horror as his flagship's shields collapsed without any visible impact, and his weapons went offline, and his engines failed, and all around him, the greatest military force in galactic history was being systematically dismantled by a single vessel crewed by a single man. The battle, if it could be called, that lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, 187 Council warships drifted powerless in space, and their crews were alive, but completely helpless, and Admiral Chun's ship did not have a scratch on it. The communication channel opened again. "I want you to understand something, High Speaker," Chun said, and his voice was still perfectly calm. "We could have done this at any time. We had this technology when we first made contact with you 300 years ago. We chose not to use it because we hoped we could build something better than an empire based on fear." Ethan could not speak, and his throat had closed up with a terror he had never experienced before. "You spent 3 centuries mocking us for being weak," Chun continued. "You called us primitive and aggressive and culturally immature. And the whole time we could have conquered your entire civilization before breakfast. But we did not want to conquer you. We wanted to be your friends." The channel remained open, but Chun seemed to be waiting for something. "What do you want?" Ethan finally managed to whisper, "I want you to go home and think about what happened here today." Chun replied, "I want you to understand that humanity was never your servant. We were your protector, and you never even knew it. And now that protection is gone because you did not deserve it." The human ship turned and began moving back toward the border. "We will let your crews repair their vessels enough to limp home," Chun said over his shoulder. "Consider it a final gift from the species you despised. And tell your council this message from humanity." He paused at the edge of sensor range. "We were kind because we wanted to be, not because we had to be. Remember that the next time you think about testing our borders." The ship vanished into human space, and Admiral Chun Wei was never seen by council eyes again. But his lesson would never be forgotten. Humanity had not been weak. Humanity had been merciful, and mercy, as the galaxy was learning, could be withdrawn. After the disaster at the border, the galaxy entered a period of deep reflection, and what people discovered during that time changed everything. It started with a Cathari investigator named Voss, who had lost his entire family when Colony 7's atmosphere failed. Voss was consumed with grief, and he wanted someone to blame. So he began digging through old records, looking for evidence that the humans had sabotaged the colonies. Before they left, what he found instead broke his heart all over again. The maintenance log showed that human engineers had been performing miracles for decades, and the equipment on Colony 7 should have failed 20 years earlier. But the humans had kept it running through constant effort and creative solutions that went far beyond their contractual obligations. They have filed hundreds of reports, warning Cathari authorities that the systems needed major upgrades, and every single report had been ignored because Cathari warriors did not take advice from soft human technicians. The humans had known the colonies would fail without them, and they had tried to prevent it, and they had been dismissed and mocked for their efforts. Voss published his findings, and the Cathari public was devastated. But that was only the beginning. On Vela Prime, a young historian named Sela was researching the Great Plague of 2847, which had killed millions, before mysteriously burning itself out. The official records said the plague had simply run its course as all diseases. Eventually, Sela found those records were lies hidden in classified archives. She discovered evidence that a human biomedical team had worked for 6 months to develop a cure, and they had deployed it secretly through the Velthari water supply because they knew the Velthari government would never accept help from humans for something so important. The humans had saved an entire civilization and then covered up their involvement because they did not want to embarrass the species. They had rescued Sela, tried to publish her findings, but the Velthari government suppressed her work. It did not matter because the truth was spreading through 1,000 different channels. The Arnax discovered that human diplomats had prevented 3 major wars in the past century by working behind the scenes to resolve conflicts before they escalated. Talari learned that human scientists had shared breakthrough technologies freely, while their own researchers had been trying to patent the same discoveries for profit. The Synthesis Collective uncovered evidence that humans had been quietly funding refugee programs and disaster relief across the galaxy, using their own resources with no expectation of recognition or reward. Every species that looked into their relationship with humanity found the same pattern. The humans had been helping everyone and asking for nothing in return. And no one had noticed because no one had been paying attention. Ambassador T-Vex compiled all of these discoveries into a single report that he presented to whatever was left of the Galactic Council. The chamber was nearly empty because most species had withdrawn to deal with their own internal crises. But those who remained listened in stunned silence as T-Vex laid out the truth. For 300 years, he said, humanity was the conscience of our civilization. They fed the hungry and healed the sick and protected the weak, and they never once demanded recognition for their service. He paused to let that sink in. And what did we give them in return? We gave them contempt. We denied them equality. We mocked their culture and dismissed their contributions, and told them they were not good enough to sit among us. High Speaker Ethan was notably absent from this session because he had resigned in disgrace after the battle at the border. The question I cannot stop asking myself, T-Vex continued, is why did they help us for so long when we treated them so badly? What possible motivation could they have had? A young representative from a minor species raised her hand. Perhaps they hoped we would change, she suggested. Quiet Lithvix nodded slowly. I believe you are correct. I had the opportunity to speak with a human official shortly after they closed their borders, and she told me something I will never forget. The chamber waited. She said they helped us because they remembered what it felt like to be alone in the universe. They remembered the fear and isolation of their early days in space, and they wanted to spare us that experience. They hoped that by showing us kindness, we would learn to show kindness in return. T-Vex's voice cracked slightly. She said they hoped wrong, but they did not regret trying. And she said they only regretted the hope. The chamber was silent for a long moment. So what do we do now? Someone asked. Eventualith Vev spread his hands. I do not know. The humans are not interested in rejoining our council, and honestly, I cannot blame them. They have built something new behind their borders, and from what I have seen, it is thriving without us. Then we have lost them forever. Another representative said despairingly. Perhaps, Tvex agreed. Or perhaps not. The humans are patient creatures, as we have learned. They spent 3 centuries waiting for us to become worthy of their friendship. Maybe if we truly change, they will give us another chance. How do we change? The young representative asked. Tvex thought about that question for a long time. We start by being honest. He finally said, we stop pretending that we are superior to others simply because our civilizations are older. We start treating every species as equals regardless of how long they have been in space. And most importantly, we start helping others without expecting anything in return. That could take generations. Someone protested. Yes, Tvex agreed. Yes, it could. The humans waited 300 years for us. Perhaps we need to wait just as long for them. Perhaps we need to prove that their hope was not wasted. The session ended without any formal resolutions, but something had shifted in the room. For the first time since the humans left, the representatives were not focused on blame or desperation. They were focused on what they might become, and somewhere behind the closed human borders, perhaps, someone was watching and waiting to see if this time the galaxy would make a different choice. 5 years after humanity closed its borders, the galaxy was a very different place. The old Galactic Council had collapsed completely, and its grand chamber on Vela Prime now stood empty, and its lights had been turned off, and its records had been archived, and no one mourned its passing. 3 species had suffered total societal breakdown in the years following humanity's departure, and their populations had scattered across space as refugees looking for anyone who would take them in. 2 more species had fallen into civil wars that were still burning, and the great trade routes that once connected thousands of worlds had fractured into dozens of smaller networks that barely functioned. But amid all this chaos, something unexpected was growing. The smaller species of the galaxy had watched the great powers fall, and they had learned a valuable lesson from the experience. They had learned that arrogance was expensive, and kindness was cheap, and cooperation was worth more than dominance. One by one, these smaller species had approached humanity's borders not with demands or threats, but with simple requests. They wanted to learn. They wanted to trade. They wanted to build something better than what had come before, and to their surprise, the humans had said yes. Director Sarah Okonkwo stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, which was the largest structure humanity had ever built, and watched ships from 40 different species dock peacefully at her facility. Behind her, ambassador Tvex, who had become one of the first non-human residents of human space, stood in quiet contemplation. I never imagined I would see anything like this, he said softly. Sarah smiled without turning around. Neither did we, honestly. When we closed our borders, we thought we were done with the galaxy forever. We thought we would just build our own civilization and let everyone else sort themselves out. What changed? Tvex asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. The small ones started showing up, she said finally. Species we had barely heard of. Species the Council had ignored for centuries. They came to our borders, and they did not demand or threaten. They just asked if we would be willing to help them. She turned to face him. How could we say no to that? Being helpful is who we are. We could not just turn that off because we were angry. Tvex nodded slowly. So you built all of this? We built it together. Sarah corrected him. That was the key. We did not want to replace one hierarchy with another. We wanted partners, not subjects. So everything here is collaborative. Every species contributes what they can and receives what they need. And no one is above anyone else. A Kethari freighter was docking at the station, and Tvex recognized the clan markings. I thought the Kethari were too proud to join your alliance. Most of them are, Sarah admitted. But some of the younger generation saw what pride cost their people. They wanted something different, so they came here and we welcomed them. And the Velthari? Tvex asked. Sarah's expression became more guarded. a few individuals have reached out, but officially they still refuse to acknowledge that they did anything wrong. Ethan may be gone, but his thinking is still very much alive among their leadership. They may never change. Tvex said sadly. They might not, Sarah agreed. And if they do not, then they will have to live with the consequences of that choice. We are not going to force anyone to join us. That would defeat the entire purpose. Tvex moved to stand beside her at the observation window. You could rule them all you know, he said quietly. After everything that has happened, no one could stop you. You have the technology and the resources and the moral authority. You could build an empire that would last for millennia. Sarah shook her head firmly. That was never what we wanted. We did not leave the council because we wanted power. We left because we wanted respect. We wanted to be treated as equals and partners and friends, not as servants or subjects. And now, Tvex asked, now we are building something better. Not a council of elders looking down on the young, but a community, a genuine partnership where every species has a voice and every contribution is valued. She gestured at the bustling station around them. It is messy and complicated, and we make mistakes every day, but it is real. These species are working together because they want to, not because anyone is forcing them to. An alarm chimed, and Sarah checked her communicator. There is a synthesis delegation arriving, she said. They want to discuss joining the alliance. Formally, Tvex felt a warmth spread through his chest because the synthesis collective was his own species, and he had spent years advocating for this moment. Will you accept them? He asked. Of course, Sarah said simply. Anyone who comes in good faith is welcome here. That has always been our policy, and it always will be. She started walking toward the docking bay, and Tvex fell into step beside her. The old council species. He said, the Volthri and the others who treated you so badly, do you think they will ever be ready to join what you are building here? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I do not know. She finally said, some of them are already changing. We can see it in the messages they send and the way their younger generations talk about the past. But others are still holding on to their pride and their anger. What will you do if they come? Sarah smiled. And it was the same sad smile that Tvex remembered from his first visit to human space all those years ago. We will do what we have always done. She said, we will extend our hand in friendship and hope that this time they take it. And if they do not, we will wait and try again, because that is who we are. She stopped at the entrance to the docking bay and turned to face him one last time. The galaxy heard us. She said, that is true, and we will probably carry those scars forever. But we are not going to let that pain make us into something we do not want to be. We are not going to let the cruelty of others turn us cruel in return. The bay doors opened, and a delegation of Synthesis Collective members stood waiting with hope and nervousness written across their alien faces. Sarah walked forward to meet them with her hand extended in the ancient human gesture of welcome. We were kind because we believed in kindness, she said over her shoulder to Tvex. That has not changed, and it never will. Tvex watched her greet his people, and he felt tears forming in eyes that had not cried in decades. The humans had every reason to hate the galaxy, and instead they had chosen to save it, not through force or conquest, but through the simple radical act of remaining true to themselves. And standing there on that station, surrounded by species who had once been strangers and were now becoming family, Tvex finally understood what humanity had been trying to teach the galaxy all along. Kindness was not weakness. Patience was not surrender. And hope, no matter how many times it was betrayed, was always worth holding on to. The galaxy had a long road ahead of it. But for the first time in years, Tvex believed they might actually reach the destination together.